He promised to meet me himself. I don't owe you. I choose you.
I know. You ever think about leaving?
I think about staying. That's new.
Arizona Territory, September 1881. The train had long pulled out, leaving the depot shuddering in its own heat. The timbers ticked and settled like they were remembering each nail that held them together. Dust hung in the air like regret that wouldn't settle. I could taste it bitter as penny copper and as dry as a lie told twice. A poster flapped tiredly on a peeling post, a lost mule, a church supper, a territorial warrant already yellowing in the corners. Somewhere a loose shutter clapped once, twice, then gave up. I took it in the way a man takes a beating, one detail at a time. She sat on a crate near the platform, gloved hands folded, the edges of her dress gray from travel. The fabric might have once been blue. Now it held to that color only in the stubborn places, the creases near the buttons, a seam along her sleeve, the hem where it had been protected by the fold of her step. A carpet bag rested by her boots, and a folded letter peeked from her skirt pocket like it had been opened too many times to still believe in its words. Everything about her said not to look too hard. The tilt of the hat veil, the angle of her shoulders, the exact calm of someone balancing a full glass in a moving room. Her hat shaded half her face, but I could see the line of her mouth, the kind that had forgotten how to expect kindness and learned to close around silence instead. I reined in Jonah, my old gelding, and let him breathe. He stood like a wise creature does when the day asks too much of it, head low, ears relaxed, ribs rising slow. The saddle leather creaked the way old things talk to each other, soft, resentful, resigned. I slid my hand along his neck and felt the knot of sweat and effort there, the wordless loyalty of a beast who's carried more than his share without complaint. Heat unrolled off him and off the boards and off the very idea of the West. I took off my hat and the sun hit my hairline, and it felt like a brand reminding me of a name I'd tried to outgrow. For a moment I just looked the platform, the rails, the wind, and the woman who looked like she'd bet everything on a promise and come up short. There's a way the body holds itself when it's run out of places to set down the hurt. I knew it. I'd worn it. The day felt too bright for such a look. And that's how I knew it was honest. I dismounted slow. The spurs didn't jingle. They whispered. That's the sound of a man who's learned what noise can cost. One of the station dogs got up and trotted 2 steps as if to announce me, then lay down again after deciding I wasn't the kind of man anything good followed. The boards under my boots complained in old voices. I stopped a few paces from her so we could pretend neither of us needed anything from the other. She kept still, like a deer that's decided not to run because it finally learned there's nowhere to go. "Ma'am," I said. My voice came out rough, like boots on gravel. My throat wasn't ready for politeness. She didn't answer at first, just kept her eyes on the station wall as if someone might step out from it, someone late but welcome. Someone carrying the other end of a decision too heavy for one pair of hands. The wind lifted the edge of her veil and laid it down again as gently as the back of a hand smoothing a fever from a child's brow. After a time, she said, without looking at me, "You're late." She turned her head, and I caught her full in the light. Her eyes were gray or maybe green, the kind that borrow color from whatever they're looking at. River water eyes that could run clear or silted and you'd believe either. "You're late," she repeated, slower this time, like a clock making sure it told the same hour twice. "He said he'd be here himself. He meant to," I told her. The words sat heavy in my mouth because they had to. "Name's Elias Boone. I came in his stead. My cousin, Thaddeus Hale, you know him by his letters." The letter in her pocket twitched like it could hear its name. Her gloved fingers touched it once, the way you touch the pulse on your wrist to confirm a thing that's supposed to be there. "He said to look for a tall man in a brown hat," she murmured, "with silver-toed boots." I looked down at my scuffed leather, dust ground into every seam. "Mine are plain." She stood then, a little stiff, a little proud, like a soldier getting to her feet at reveille because the day demanded it, not because the body agreed. "He's not coming, is he?" "No, ma'am," I said. The lie would have been kinder, but I have never been the kind of man who could carry one that large and live. He took sick 2 days out of Prescott. Doctor says the lungs won't hold up to travel. He asked me to ride here, meet you, and make sure you weren't left standing alone. For a heartbeat, the world went still, no wind, no flies, just the long sigh of the rails cooling. Even Jonah seemed to hold his breath. Then she nodded once, slow, like the motion hurt something she couldn't afford to lose. "I see," she said. The words were level as a carpenter's tool, but I heard the splintering behind them. "So you're the apology." "I'm the messenger," I said. "And the ride home, if you've a mind to take one." Her eyes flicked toward the empty tracks, the way a woman glances at a window she knows won't open. "Home," she repeated. "That would require having one." May. I'd heard men say they had no home and meant they hadn't yet found a town to drink them quiet. She meant the other kind, a place that had unchosen her. I didn't know what to say to that, so I tipped my hat toward the hotel down the street. "There's a place called the Gallows House. Clean enough. I'll see you have a room for 3 nights. Call it a debt owed to my cousin." She frowned, not at the offer, but at the part of herself that might be tempted to take it. "I don't take charity." "Oh, then call it justice," I said, surprising myself with how much I believed it. For being lied to by a man too sick to admit he'd gone soft. That earned me a look not friendly, not cruel, just measuring as if she were a storekeeper and I a coin she doubted. "Justice," she said, trying on the word to see if any part of it would hold. "Very well." "Oh." We walked down the dusty road together, her carpetbag bumping against her leg in measured rhythm, like a second heart that had agreed to keep beating, though it resented the work. I led Jonah by the reins and tried not to walk too close. She had a way of taking up exactly as much space as her bones required and not an inch more. The whole town felt half-built, half-forgotten, a saloon with peeling paint like sunburned skin, a blacksmith shop coughing smoke and sparks like the memory of thunder, a telegraph office that clicked like a nervous clock, refusing to look you in the eye. A boy in suspenders watched us with open curiosity until his mother pulled him inside by the shoulder, as if sorrow might be catching. The heat pressed down on us like a sentence passed by a judge as patient as time. Inside the Gallows House, the air smelled of tallow and tired dreams, and last week's coffee reboiled. The clerk looked up, took us in, and looked back down again. One of the small mercies people practice without knowing it. The wallpaper had once been green leaves on cream. Now the leaves were smoke, stained ghosts. I paid for a room upstairs and slid the key toward her. 3 nights, I said. After that, you decide where to go. She didn't take the key right away. The glove trembled, but the hand didn't. "Why are you doing this?" Because once, years ago, I had ridden to a different depot for a different woman who had also been promised a life in letters. Because the war had taught me to deliver bad news and the territory had taught me there's more than one kind of battlefield. Because my cousin Thaddeus, sweet-tongued and marrow-sick, had gripped my wrist so hard I can still feel the pattern of his fingers and said, "Don't let her stand there, Eli." Not alone, not with my name on her mouth. Because there are debts a man is owed and debts he owes, and sometimes they are the same thing. None of this would fit in a room where a fly circled a lamp the color of watered whiskey, so I gave her the truest small version. Because a man shouldn't promise what another man has to clean up after, I said. And because you look like you could use a door that locks from the inside. Her fingers brushed the key not by accident, and she took it. Her name came soft as a confession. "I'm Rosemary Hale," she said, almost apologizing to the air. "No relation to your cousin, if you're wondering." "Didn't figure you were," I said, but the coincidence might have made him think God was sending him a sign. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe he just liked the idea of something that shared his name." The way she said it told me she knew how men could be comforted by the nearest mirror. When she climbed the stairs, the hem of her dress caught a splinter. She didn't stop to fix it. Some people never stop moving because they're afraid if they do, they'll remember why they started. The clerk slid me a ledger to sign, and I wrote my name careful, the way you write it for a tombstone engraver, legible, unsentimental. I stood on that porch a long while, watching the road melt into the horizon the way tin melts when you hold it over a candle. A freight wagon rattled past, carrying barrels that hit every rut like a man counting his regrets. The desert wind carried the smell of creosote and old sweat, the familiar perfume of failure, and a far-off note of something green I could not name. I should have ridden off. I didn't. The truth is, men like me have a compass that only spins toward trouble when it sees it wearing its Sunday dress. Night fell sudden, like it always does out here, as if the sky had been waiting impatiently all day for its turn. The light folded in on itself, gold, then copper, then the color of dried blood at the edge of a knife. I set up camp behind the livery because 4 walls feel like too much when you've spent years sleeping under things that might collapse. The livery roof popped in the cooling, like hands snapping knuckles after work. I loosened Jonah's cinch. He sighed in gratitude, a sound so human it felt impolite to listen. I rubbed him down with a burlap scrap, and he pressed his big head once into my shoulder, reminding me a living creature trusted me without needing a reason beyond this day done. I fed him oats measured by habit more than thought, then spread my bedroll where the straw gave up its dry sweetness to the night. The stars came out in their patient order, one by one, like soldiers answering roll call. Men who sleep under sky learn its traffic, what belongs, where, and when. The planet low in the west that used to guide us home along the Big Blue in Missouri, the scatter that looks like a hand opening, the thin vein of cloud that means wind tomorrow. I didn't sleep. There's a kind of silence that soldiers keep long after the guns quit. It's not peace, it's what happens when you stop trusting noise. In the dark of the livery, a horse shifted, a chain clinked, a mouse negotiated the edge of a sack, and won. My mind did what it does when the body's still. It took me places I didn't ask to go. Thaddeus at a kitchen table back in Boone County, letters spread like cards, lungs ticking like a worn pocket watch. "Write it plain," he'd said when the coughing let him have 3 words in a row. I told her I was tall in the way. A man is tall when he stands up for something. I told her the boots were silver because I wanted there to be something fine about me when the day came. He had looked at me from under those pale lashes and smiled the old boyhood smile. "Bring her, Eli. Don't let my sin become hers. There are days you think you have already paid for every wrong you plan to commit. Then the day comes and you learn how debt multiplies in the bones." Near dawn, I slept a little. I dreamed the war not as thunder, but as a door left open to a room no one wanted to enter. I woke to that peculiar calm that sometimes visits a man right before trouble or grace. There's no telling which until it's already named you. The sky had turned the color of iron before heat, the horizon holding its breath red and dull like a coal under ash. I walked back to the hotel and found her in the dining room, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a biscuit she hadn't eaten. Her gloves lay folded beside her plate like a truce she wasn't ready to sign. The lamp threw a patient light over everything, blessing the poor and the temporary the same. The smell of coffee rose in a spiral as tight as a promise that might hold if no one breathed too hard. "Morning," I said. She nodded, and the line of her mouth softened, maybe half an inch. "You said 3 nights," she said. "What happens after that?" "That depends," I said. "You came here to marry a man with land. The land's still there, even if he isn't." I pictured the shack and the shade tree that had given up trying, the fence posts like a mouth missing teeth. "Maybe you'd like to see it. You'd take me there?" she asked, skeptical as a banker watching a man count out coppers. "I'd ride beside you," I said. "It's a day's journey west. Not much to look at, but it's honest ground." Saying it out loud, I felt a warmth rise that had nothing to do with coffee. Honest ground is a scarce thing. Maybe I wanted to show it to someone who would know it when she saw it. She studied me for a long moment. It's a humbling thing to be inspected by grief wearing a bonnet. "And what do you get out of it, Mr. Boone?" "I get to do one decent thing before the sun forgets my name." The words surprised me with how ready they were. Maybe I'd been carrying them longer than I knew. Maybe they'd been carrying me. Something flickered in her eyes, not softness, but respect, which is sturdier. "All right," she said, "but I ride my own horse." "Fair," I said. "There's a sorrel mare in the livery, gentle enough for company. We'll leave after breakfast." She ate her biscuit then, slow and neat, as if to show biscuits how they were meant to behave. I watched the way her hands didn't shake, and felt that small, particular admiration a man feels seeing anyone practice a craft. Hers was keeping herself assembled. We left Gallows Creek when the light was still gold, the kind of light that makes even horses look kind-hearted. The trail west ran flat for miles before folding into low hills and dry creeks that had forgotten they were once named for water. The sound of our horses was steady, a rhythm like breathing for two people who had forgotten how. Even the vultures flew with a dignity I envied. We didn't talk much. There's a conversation men and women have with the country itself. When they ride it together, the language is dust and shade and the measure of a horse beneath you. When we did speak, the words had the usefulness of tools. Gait, I'd say, and she'd lean down in that careful way and lift the loop without looking at me. Rock, she'd say, and I'd guide Jonah left. In another life, this would have been courting. In this life, it felt like decency, learning the names of things again. At a narrow bend in the creek bed, we stopped to water the horses. The creek was honest about its meanness, no pretending to be more than a string of puddles polite enough to line up. She knelt and dipped her hands into the thin stream, then brought them to her face. The water left streaks down her cheeks, cutting paths through the dust the way forgiveness cuts through a story, not erasing it, just making a way to breathe inside it. She closed her eyes and listened to the sound her own hands made dripping onto the stones. I looked away because there are prayers a man should not watch while they are being prayed. You were in the war, she said suddenly, not looking at me. I was, I said. Cavalry, Union side, Missouri regiment. I said it as if that explained anything. It explains nothing to anyone who didn't also carry a canteen whose strap rubbed a permanent scar across his chest. You came back whole, she said. I laughed once, short. I came back breathing. That's the best a man can hope for. The words were the shape of an old truth, polished smooth by use. Limbs grow back in dreams. The rest of you never does. She looked at me, then really looked, the way a seamstress looks at a tear to see how to set about fixing it. I sewed the seams on uniforms in Philadelphia, she said. Too many shoulders for the bodies that never came to claim them. It landed in me the way a bullet used to land in a fence post. Quiet. Final. That's hard work, I said, and meant more than my words could carry. It was necessary, she said. Hard would have been doing nothing. We rode in silence after that. The hills rose and fell, practicing the patient breath of the world. A jackrabbit bounded in a way that looked like laughter. The air smelled of dust and sage, and the ghost of rain that had changed its mind. The sky kept pretending it didn't care, and failing at it where it met the mountains. By late afternoon, the shack came into view, one room, half a fence, and a roof that might hold if the wind stayed polite. If places can be ashamed of themselves, this one was. I dismounted and tied Jonah to the rail that once had held 3 horses and now held hope together, one nail at a time. She stayed on her horse a moment longer, taking it in the way a woman measures cloth with her eyes before cutting. How much can be made from what is left? Then she swung down, shook her skirts out of habit rather than necessity, squared her shoulders, and walked up to the door. It creaked when she pushed it open, a tired hinge announcing us to a tired room. Inside, there was a cot with enough blanket to tell me a man had once believed he'd see winter here, a cold stove and a coffee pot that had survived someone else's temper, a table made from a door laid across 2 barrels, dust but no filth, a man's attempt at decency, half-finished. There's an honesty in half-finished decency I prefer to anything polished. She turned to me. It's plain, she said, making a ledger in her head. Plain walls, plain roof, plain air, no promise. It's honest, I said, because the place wasn't pretending to be other than it was. I can work with that, she said. Some women say I can and mean I might if the world permits. She meant I will because that is how I remain myself. I figured, I said. You didn't strike me as the fainting type. Fainting is for people with a cushion behind them. She smiled then, just the edge of one, enough to let a little light in around the teeth. No, she said, that's one sin I've never had the luxury of. The wind shifted. The air smelled of rain far off, the kind that never quite finds its job but tries. She looked toward it, then back at me. Why are you really helping me? Because sometimes I hear Jonah breathing at night and remember it was my horse still standing, while other men's lay down forever. Because Thaddeus once pressed a handkerchief to his mouth, and it came away red like an embarrassed cherry blossom, and I understood the arithmetic of the thing. Breaths remaining, miles remaining, mercies remaining, because I have done harm without meaning to, and this seemed like a place to lay a brick in the other direction. Because I know what it feels like to arrive somewhere and find the person you were counting on is gone, I said. And because no one deserves to start over alone. She studied me for a moment that felt longer than the day, not to test the truth of the statement but to measure its worth. "You'll sleep in the barn," she said finally. Not an order, not a rebuke, a boundary offered like bread. "Until I decide what comes next." "That's fair," I said. "Fair is a word that tastes better in the mouth than in life, but you take it where it's found." I started a fire by the stove and brewed coffee that could have dissolved a nail. The first hiss from the pot felt like a room that remembered its own reason. She sat on the cot, elbows on her knees, hands steepled like a woman who had prayed enough to know the form, if not always the words. Outside, the wind began to talk again, tapping against the boards like fingers on a door. When I brought her a tin cup, she took it carefully, wrapping both hands around the heat, as if it might teach hers how to feel warm again. "My father built our house back east," she said, eyes on the fire. The glow made a temple out of a room that had never hoped for such a ceremony. "Said wood remembers kindness if you touch it enough." "He was right," I said. "Most things remember." My voice surprised me. It had forgotten how to be gentle. I looked at the table, at the old door's keyhole that now opened onto nothing, and felt an ache for every lock that had lost its purpose. She looked up. "Do you?" "Every day," I said. "That's the problem. Memory is a saddle you never quite get out from under. You only learn to ride the ache it teaches." She smiled faintly, then drank. "You build fences?" "I do," I said. "And I'll need help come morning." "You'll have it," she said. "If you promise to teach, not command. That's the only kind of teaching worth doing." The war had taught me too many other kinds. Night came on in a way that felt deserved. The air cooled. Coyotes stitched the horizon to the dark with their small thread of song. I walked the edges of the place and counted what could betray us. A loose board, a stubborn latch, the trick the wind plays at the northwest corner. I checked the door 3 times before bedding down in the barn. It was not mistrust of her I carried. It was the habit of men who have learned what not. Checking costs. Through the wall, I could hear her humming a low, steady tune, something she carried from a life that hadn't asked permission to end. The melody had no words, and too many words all at once. It moved through the planks and through me, and through the hollow places the war had carved as if it knew those rooms better than I did. Toward dawn, I woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not mine. Morning light slotted through the barn boards, lifting little golden ladders of dust. I stood, and my joints argued, but the day didn't take offense. She stood by the stove when I stepped inside, hair braided, sleeves rolled, light touching her, in a way the world rarely does anyone anymore, as if it recognized something it had forgotten it loved. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "You were snoring." "That's so?" I said, trying on a grin I hadn't worn in months. Like a man who'd earned it, a kindness disguised as teasing, the only kind worth anything. I smiled at that. "We'll start with fence posts after breakfast," I said. "Then fix the roof before the storm remembers us." She nodded, eyes bright in that way. Resilience sometimes masquerades as joy. "Good. I don't like waiting for anything I can build myself." Neither did I. Work is the closest thing to prayer I've ever trusted. The day broke clean. Gold through the window, humility tempered with honey. I stepped outside a minute before we began, and the morning stood there like a friend who decided to forgive you without making a speech about it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe the land wasn't punishing me for staying alive. And that's where the West begins again, not with gun smoke or gold, but with 2 tired souls learning that decency still has hands, and those hands can build. The morning came clear, the air carrying that brittle edge the desert wears before rain. The dawn light stretched thin across the plain, touching the world with a quiet that felt earned. The smell of ash lingered from the night fire, mixing with the sweetness of damp earth and the faint musk of horses. My breath came out white in the chill, and I could feel the promise of heat crouched just beyond the horizon. The fire had burned itself out, but the scent of smoke clung to my coat like a ghost that refused to leave. Every step I took through the yard stirred up the soft crust of mud from last night's drizzle. The sound was gentle, as though the earth itself were trying not to wake. I stepped out of the barn and found Rosemary already outside, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled, measuring a fence post against her shoulder, like she meant to take the land's measure before it took hers. The sight of her hit me the way sunrise hits a river, bright, surprising, inevitable. She was a small figure against a great silence, the kind of image the desert keeps for itself. Her hair was pinned loose today, a few strands catching the light like threads of gold dust, and the look on her face was one of quiet calculation. It wasn't vanity that made her straighten the post and eye the horizon. It was resolve, the stubborn courage of someone who'd learned the world owed her nothing, and had decided to build anyway. She looked over, the light catching the fine dust in her hair. "I figured we'd need 8 posts to close the east line," she said. "If you dig, I'll drive." There was a spark in her tone, steady, practical, like she'd already decided that whatever this land demanded, she'd meet it square. I walked closer, the crunch of my boots loud in the morning stillness. "You ever used a driver before?" I asked. She smiled just a little. "No, but I've been underestimated before." "Oh." That smile was a rare thing. It changed her face, not softening it so much as proving there was warmth under all that iron. She gripped the post driver, the length of iron almost half her weight, and lifted it once to test the balance. The muscles in her arms flexed, small but certain. "Heavy but fair," she said, and the phrase hung in the air like scripture. I took up the shovel. The dirt was stubborn but not cruel, half sand, half stone, like everything out here. Each clump I turned loose smelled of minerals and old storms. The ground gave reluctantly, the metal biting into it with the rhythm of work that had existed since the first man thought to fence something in. She worked beside me, her breath measured, her gloves blackening with effort. The sound of metal against earth became our language: dig, drop, drive, breathe. Sometimes she'd glance up, the brim of her hat shadowing her eyes, and I'd see something in them that I hadn't seen since before the war. Belief, faint, but alive. By mid-morning, the fence stood like a line of decisions, straight enough, honest enough. She brushed the dust off her palms and looked at our work. "That'll keep the cow in," she said. I leaned on the shovel and followed her gaze. The posts marched away into the distance, each one a promise against emptiness. "Or keep the world out," I said. "Maybe both," she said softly. The wind picked up right then, lifting a curtain of dust that blurred the horizon. It whistled through the wire we hadn't yet strung, making a low hum like the tuning of some distant instrument. She stood with her arms crossed, shoulders squared, watching it. There was a loneliness to her posture that matched the country, both of them scarred, both refusing to bow. We broke for coffee and bread under the low shadow of the roof. The sky had gone white, the kind of color that means weather's thinking about you. I caught her glancing west more than once. The shade wasn't much, but it felt like mercy. The coffee was rough and bitter, the bread dry, yet it tasted like reward. A hawk circled high above, its cry a single note in all that quiet. She kept looking toward the far hills where the horizon began to blur. Her glances weren't nervous, exactly more like a woman waiting on a truth to arrive. "Expecting someone?" I asked. "No," she said. Then after a pause, "Maybe I'm just not used to peace staying." Her words found their way into me. I knew what she meant. Peace never did stay long out here. It was a traveler, never a tenant. "Neither am I," I said. She smiled without looking up. "You talk like a man who's been shot at." Her voice held humor, but the kind that comes from knowing. "I have," I said, "but only the first few times mattered. After that, you realize most bullets are warnings." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you think pain teaches?" "Only if you live long enough to listen." That made her laugh, not the loud kind, but the small, genuine one that belongs to people who haven't laughed much lately. The wind shifted again, bringing a new smell, wet clay, ozone, and faraway rain. She lifted her face to it, eyes closing for a heartbeat. "It smells like rain," she said. "It smells like trouble," I said, "because trouble always comes on weather that pretends to be gentle." For a moment we stood there in that thin light, listening. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled like a cart of stones down a hill. That's when I saw him first, just a shimmer at the edge of sight. Then the dust cloud, then horse, then man, tall in the saddle, coat too fine for this country. Even from a distance, I knew he didn't belong to the land. "Visitor," I said. She turned, saw the shape moving through the light, and went still. "That can't be," her voice trailed off, but I saw something flash across her face, recognition, dread, maybe both. The rider slowed, raised a hand. As he came closer, the smell of his cologne reached us, wrong as a silver spoon in a mess tent. His horse was sleek, city-bought, shod too neatly for this terrain. When he came close enough, she whispered, "Whitcomb." The name hung in the heat like a fly that wouldn't die. He dismounted like someone used to people waiting for him. He took off his hat, smiled that city smile that doesn't touch the eyes. "Rosemary," he said, "you're a long way from Philadelphia." Her jaw tightened. "Not far enough, apparently." "I came to see if you were safe," he said, ignoring me. "I was," she said. "Until now." That one hit true, and I didn't bother to hide my grin. He looked past her to the house, the fence, the cow chewing in the pen. "So this is where the mail-order dream ended up," he said. "A shack and a field." "This is where the lies ended," she said. Her tone was calm, but the air between them vibrated like wire pulled too tight. His eyes cut to me. "And who's this?" "Neighbor," I said. "Protector?" he asked, smirking. "Only if needed." Whitcomb laughed. "The territory's full of heroes and dirt. Seems you've found both." "Say what you came to say," Rosemary told him. The wind pressed her dress against her legs, and she didn't flinch. He reached into his coat and pulled a folded paper. The edges were crisp, the ink dark. "Your fiancé, Mr. Hale, sold his claim to the railroad before he took sick. The company plans to cut a line right through your spring. I bought the option myself. I thought I'd offer you something fair before they come with lawyers." "What's fair?" she asked. $200 and a ticket back east," he said. "Enough to start over. With me, if you wish." I could almost hear the ground itself laughing. Rosemary's chin lifted. "You traveled 1,000 miles to offer me pity." "To offer you sense," he said. "You can't live out here. You'll break before the year turns." "Maybe," she said, "but I'll break on my own terms." He looked at me again. "You going to let her throw her life away?" "She doesn't belong to me," I said, "and that's the whole point." Whitcomb's smile faltered. "You're both fools." "Likely," I said, "but fools sleep better when they don't owe anyone." He folded the paper and shoved it into her hand. "You'll change your mind when the law catches up." "Then we'll see," she said. He mounted and rode off, the sound of his horse's hooves fading like an argument that never convinced anyone. The wind carried away his cologne first, then his dust. She held the paper for a long while before dropping it into the stove. The flame took it quick. Smoke curled up, carrying away all the tidy words that men like Whitcomb write to make theft sound civilized. I watched her face in the firelight. There was no triumph there, just the steady calm of someone who'd chosen her own ruin over someone else's mercy. "I guess that settles it," I said. "For now," she said. "But men like him always come back with more paper and better ink." "Then we'll build faster than they can write," I said. She looked at me then, and I saw gratitude mixed with something quieter, something that looked a lot like faith trying to be born again. That night, thunder rolled in from the west. The wind slapped the shutters like an impatient debt collector. I moved to check the latch, and she said from the cot, "It's holding." "Just making sure," I said. "You always check 3 times, she said. "Old habit." "From the war?" "From losing things I meant to keep," I said. Lightning flashed, filling the room with silver light. It carved her face into marble and shadow. For a moment, she didn't look tired anymore. She looked eternal, like one of those figures in church glass that still watch long after the congregation's gone. "Do you think your cousin ever loved me?" she asked quietly. "I think he loved the idea of you," I said. "The difference is half the misery in this world." She nodded slowly, eyes on the storm. "And you? What do you love, Mr. Boone?" "Things that stay fixed after I walk away," I said. "So far, that's been hard to find." The thunder answered for both of us. When the rain came, it came honest, no half measures. It drummed on the roof like applause for something neither of us had meant to perform. She sat on the cot, watching it, and for a long while we didn't speak. The air smelled of wet dust and relief. By morning, half the fence had gone down. We spent hours in mud, resetting posts, laughing when the ground tried to swallow our boots. The rain turned everything slick, and for the first time in years, I heard myself laugh out loud. At one point she slipped, and I caught her arm. For a second, her weight was in my hands, light and strong, and then she righted herself, cheeks flushed. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it," I said. "I wasn't going to," she said and smiled. That smile stayed with me longer than it should have. The rain eased, the air smelled of wet creosote, and something like forgiveness. We stood together, watching the last drops slide off the roof, the world washed raw again. "I suppose we'll need to ride into town," she said. "If the railroad means to steal the land, we'd best see the deed." "I'll go," I said. "I'm coming," she said. "It's a rough road," I said. "So am I," she said. And I believed her. We rode that afternoon, the sky bruised and low, the horses' hooves sending up small ghosts of steam where they met the damp earth. The town sat quiet when we reached it, the kind of quiet that follows after bad news has already done its work. A sign creaked in the wind above the mercantile, and the air smelled of dust, coffee, and waiting. At the recorder's office, the clerk flipped through ledgers until his fingers turned gray with old ink. "Thaddeus Hale," I said. He frowned. "Claim noted, fee partial, survey missing." "Missing how?" Rosemary asked. "Filed but never sealed," he said. "Surveyor died before it could be stamped." "Who holds the papers?" I asked. "Lofgren's apprentice," he said. "Name's Pike. Works behind the mercantile. Smart. Honest. Poor." We found Pike surrounded by maps and dust, his hair sticking up like a haystack. He was young, nervous, and eager to be right. "I remember Hale," he said. "Coughed through half the visit, paid for the survey, said he'd return with the rest. Never did." "You still have the map?" I asked. He bit his lip. "Sold by mistake. To a man named Cutler, foreman for the railroad." "Where do I find him?" "North Camp," he said. "By the river bend." We thanked him and stepped outside. The sky had gone pink with dust, the wind picking up again. "You mean to ride there?" she said. "I do." "I'll come," she said. "No," I said. "You'll stay here. Someone has to keep the roof from wandering off." She folded her arms. "You assume I need protection." "I assume you're smart enough to let me do what I'm good at," I said. She didn't like it, but she nodded. "Fine. Bring back what belongs to us." "I will," I said. As I turned to mount, she touched my sleeve. "Elias," she said. It was the first time she'd used my name. "Don't get killed." "I'll do my best," I said. The trail north cut through mesquite and bad memory. I rode fast, the light falling, the land turning gold and dangerous. The smell of sage rose with every hoofbeat, and the wind began to sing that old tune about men who ride alone into things they can't quite fix. When I reached the river camp, the sun was low, and the sky looked bruised from holding back more rain. The rest of that story would have to wait for another day. But in that moment, mud on my boots, her name still warm in my ears, I realized something I hadn't in years. Some promises are worth rebuilding the whole damn fence for, and somewhere behind me, in that half-built house on honest ground, a woman was waiting not for rescue, not for forgiveness, but for the next morning to come clear again. I spent that night on the porch, knife in hand, sharpening the same edge I'd already sharpened 3 times. The blade sang low against the whetstone, a dry whisper that cut the silence into manageable pieces. Sparks flicked now and then, tiny orange stars that lived and died before they reached the floorboards. Every pull steadied my breathing. Every scrape gave shape to thoughts that would otherwise wander off into darker places. The knife didn't need sharpening, it was my mind that did. The sound of steel against stone kept my thoughts in order. In that rhythm, I could almost hear the drums of old campaigns, the snort of cavalry horses, the metallic prayer of men who'd learned that faith sometimes looked like maintenance. War leaves a man with strange habits. Peace leaves him unsure what to do with his hands. Inside, Rosemary moved slow, her steps steady, unhurried. The lamplight turned the window gold and flickered against her shadow, like it wasn't sure whether to trust her yet. She was sewing again, patching something that didn't deserve saving except that it belonged to her. The faint thrum of needle through cloth came between the passes of my blade. Every now and then, her silhouette crossed the window, the curve of her neck lit in that trembling amber glow. The glass hummed softly with wind. She looked like she'd been carved out of the light itself, a moving portrait of quiet defiance. When you've lived through war, you learn to recognize the quiet before a fight. The air goes thick, like the land itself is holding its breath. That's how the desert felt, watching, waiting. Even the crickets went cautious. The stars seemed brighter, sharper, as if they'd been waiting to bear witness. I'd seen this kind of stillness on too many mornings that ended in gunfire. The land was teaching me again, reminding me that peace out here was never a gift, only a pause. By dawn, I had my decision. I couldn't sit here mending fences while men like Cutler wrote our story in ink we'd never see. If the railroad wanted to take this land, they'd have to face me, not a woman alone. The sun was only a thought on the horizon when I stood. The smell of dust mixed with creosote and last night's coffee grounds. I felt that old, steady burn of purpose come alive, the one that doesn't ask permission. Some men wake craving bread. I woke craving justice done clean. I saddled Jonah before the sun cleared the ridge. Rosemary came out just as I was cinching the last strap. She had a shawl around her shoulders, hair braided tight. The dawn light painted her in rose and smoke. She looked half angel, half storm cloud. There was no sleep in her eyes. She must have known I'd ride. She watched my hands the way a person watches the last flame in a cold room. "You're going back," she said. "I am. Then I'm coming." Lo. The wind lifted the edge of her shawl like it agreed with her. I shook my head. "This isn't your fight." Her chin lifted a fraction. "It's my name they're stealing." That caught me clean. The kind of truth that lands gentle but leaves a bruise. "That's exactly why you shouldn't be there when I take it back." She studied me, calm but burning behind the eyes. She studied me a long moment. "You're planning to come home then?" "I am," I said. "If I wasn't, I'd have said goodbye." "Oh." She folded her arms. "You could have fooled me." Her voice carried the edge of hurt polished into wit. I looked away, then back. "You make it harder to leave, Mrs. Hale." "I'm not Mrs. Anything," she said, voice quiet. "Not yet." That word yet hung between us, tender as it was dangerous. The air seemed to hold its breath. I rode north again. The sun climbed slow, but my thoughts outran it. The trail shimmered like an old scar through sage and shale. Jonah's hooves beat time with my heart. The sun climbed slow, but my thoughts ran faster than my horse. Cutler's camp was 20 miles off, but trouble travels farther on whiskey and pride. I'd learned that kind of math long ago. Distance meant nothing when men believed they were right. Halfway there, I stopped at a trading post run by an old friend named Dev Merritt. He'd fought beside me back in '65, the kind of man who carried his ghosts like medals. The place hadn't changed. Same warped porch boards, same smell of tobacco and oil, same half-shot sign creaking overhead. Inside, the stove crackled with the confidence of something older than peace. "Boone," he said when he saw me ride up. "I thought you'd gone to dust." "Not yet," I said. "I need a copy of a claim map. Railroad's got the original." My voice sounded foreign, even to me, hoarse, decisive. He spat tobacco into a can. "They playing dirty again?" "They never stopped." "Lo." He nodded toward the back room. "You remember Lofgren, the old surveyor? I've got his ledgers from before he died. Take a look." The floorboards sighed under our boots. Inside, the air smelled like mold and memory. I flipped through the yellowed pages until I found the name Thaddeus Hale. The coordinates matched the land at Dry Willow Draw. The seal wasn't there, but the witness mark was. And that was enough. I traced my finger along the faded ink. It felt like touching a ghost that still had something to say. I copied the details, rolled the paper tight, and slipped it into my coat. "This'll do," I said. "Boone," Dev said, leaning on the doorframe, "you ever get tired of fighting men who already think they've won?" "Every day," I said. "But it's better than letting them be right." He smiled. "That's the Boone I remember. Watch your back. Cutler's got hired hands meaner than his bosses." "I've met their kind," I said. "The kind who laugh too hard, drink too much, and shoot before the laughter's done." The rest of the ride was dust and silence. The river shimmered ahead, silver as a knife. I saw Cutler's tents through the cottonwoods, smoke rising thin and mean. The air smelled of grease and ambition. Even the birds kept their distance. I dismounted and tied Jonah behind a boulder, then walked the rest of the way. I didn't need a gun for this kind of talk, just a good memory and a louder truth. The ground under my boots was cracked and patient. Somewhere a hammer struck metal, a blacksmith tuning his conscience. Cutler was hunched over a map table when I stepped into the light. "Back so soon," he said. "I came for what's mine." He smiled without warmth. "Your woman's land, you mean?" "She's her own," I said. "But the paper you're holding bears a dead man's name, not hers. And I've got proof that the deed was witnessed and recorded before your company's ink dried." Laugh. His eyes flickered, quick as a snake's tongue. He laughed. "That's not proof. That's paper. And paper burns." "Then I'll carve it in stone," I said. He straightened, face hardening. "You think the law will side with you?" "I don't need the law," I said. "I just need the truth. And I've got witnesses who remember Lofgren's stamp." I thought of Dev, of the ledger heavy with dust and honesty. He reached for his revolver. "You don't belong here, Boone." Neither do you," I said, and slammed the ledger copy down on his table. "You'll leave Dry Willow Draw alone. That spring's claimed fair. You come near it again, I'll make sure the company knows you falsified records. They like efficiency, not scandal." His jaw worked like he was chewing stone. "You talk big for a man without friends." "Depends on the day," I said. "Right now I've got enough." He stared at me, then laughed once, short, sharp. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." "Oh, guts don't rot as fast as greed," I said. He leaned forward. "You really think that woman's worth this trouble?" I met his eyes. "I think trouble's worth less than her peace." For a moment he hesitated, maybe recognizing a kind of faith he couldn't buy. We stood there until the fire popped between us. Then he stepped back. "Get out before I change my mind." I turned and walked away, slow enough to prove I wasn't afraid. The desert swallowed the sound of my boots. Behind me, the tent flaps breathed once in the wind, then fell silent. It took a day and a half to ride back. The air had turned cooler, the wind full of the smell of coming rain again. When I reached the ridge above the shack, I saw smoke, thin, white, steady, not fire, cooking. Relief loosened something in my chest I hadn't known was tight. Every mile home felt earned. The sky softened at the edges, the kind of blue that forgives. She was mending a quilt on the porch when I rode up. The light caught in her hair like it belonged there. She looked up. Needle paused. "You're late," she said. "I got lost counting liars," I said. "That can take a while," she said, setting her work aside. "Well?" I pulled the rolled map from my coat and handed it to her. "The land's yours. Recorded, witnessed, legal. Cutler won't come near again unless he wants to hang his job beside your door." She took the paper, unrolled it, and ran her fingers over the ink like it might vanish. "You risked a lot." "I've risked more for less," I said. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw the edge of her guard lower. "You're bleeding," she said. I glanced down, a scrape on my arm, nothing more. "Paper cut," I said. She laughed, short, sudden, beautiful. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." We went inside. She brewed coffee, strong and dark, poured 2 cups, and slid one toward me. "You could have been killed," she said quietly. "I've been killed before," I said. "Didn't stick." Her eyes searched mine, finding humor where fear should have been. Her eyes softened. "You talk like a man who stopped believing in miracles." "I talk like a man who's seen them misplaced." She smiled, shaking her head. "Then maybe it's time we build one of our own." The way she said we landed gentle but permanent. The next week passed in small labors that meant everything. Patching the roof, digging the new well deeper, painting the door red just because she liked the color. The sound of our work filled the silence between words. Each evening, we sat by the porch, the light bleeding gold over the hills. The rhythm of ordinary life returned like music remembered. We didn't speak of what might come next, we simply kept breathing in time with the land. Sometimes, she hummed old hymns. Sometimes I told stories about the war, nothing heroic, just the kind that remind you survival isn't always noble. She listened, never flinching, never pitying. She had her own ghosts, but she didn't ask me to name mine. The hum of her song softened the edges of those memories, turned them from wounds into weather. On the 5th night, I woke to the sound of hoofbeats. Not Jonah's, not ours. Distant, heavy. I got up, hand on the rifle I kept near the door. Through the window, I saw lanterns moving toward the creek, 3 riders. No company markings. The moon hung thin as a blade, carving silver lines across the land. My heart shifted into that slow, cold rhythm it remembered too well. Rosemary stirred. "What is it?" "Visitors," I said. "Stay inside." She got up anyway, pulling on her coat. "I'm not hiding." "You're not," I said. "You're guarding the light." She didn't argue, but her jaw tightened in that way that meant she was cataloging every decision I made for later judgment. She didn't argue, but she didn't look pleased about it either. I stepped out into the yard, rifle across my arm. The riders slowed when they saw me. The one in front, Cutler's man, the one with the scar under his eye, held up his hands. "Peaceable," he called. "We just came to deliver a letter." "Then toss it here," I said. He did. The envelope landed in the dirt. "From the company," he said, "signed and stamped." They turned and rode off without another word. Their silhouettes melted into the dark, the sound of hooves fading like guilt. I waited until they were gone, then picked up the letter. The wax seal bore the company's crest, but the writing inside was short. "The claim known as Dry Willow Draw has been removed from survey expansion. The company acknowledges prior ownership. No further action will be taken. C. Cutler." I read it twice, then burned it in the stove. Fire is the only witness that keeps secrets. The paper curled into ash, words dissolving into a language only smoke understands. When Rosemary came to stand beside me, I said, "It's done." She nodded. "For now." We stood there a long time, watching the flames eat the last of the paper. The orange light danced over her face, softening what the years had hardened. Then she said softly, "You could have walked away." "I did," I said. "I just walked back after." Her hand found my arm, not seeking, not pleading, just steady. "Then maybe we both did." Outside, the rain began again, tapping the roof like slow applause. The first cold came early that year. The nights sharpened. The wind picked up grit. We sealed the cracks with rags and pitch, took turns stoking the stove through the dark hours. The hens began to roost closer to the walls, and Jonah's breath smoked white in the morning light. Each dawn brought frost lace on the window panes, delicate as handwriting from another life. I fixed the barn door one afternoon while she sorted seed by the table. Every few minutes she'd hum, half to herself, half to the silence. When the hammering stopped, she looked up. "You're thinking too loud," she said. "I was thinking we might stay," I said. Her needle froze. "Stay?" "Here," I said. "Through the winter. Maybe longer." She set the fabric down. "You think we can make it work?" "I think we already are," I said. She smiled, just barely. "Then we'll need more blankets." "I'll trade for wool in town," I said. "And sugar," she added. "If we're going to live through the cold, I'd like something sweet." "You've already got that," I said. She laughed, and for a moment the room felt bigger than its walls. The laughter lingered, soft as the smoke that curled from the chimney. Later, after the light had gone, we sat on the porch. The moon was thin, the air still. She leaned her head back against the post and closed her eyes. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "That I'm not alone," she said. "That's a start," I said. She looked at me, eyes bright even in the dark. "You're not either." "No," I said. "Not anymore." Her hand brushed mine. The touch was small, sure, like sealing a deal older than words. We stayed like that, quiet, the kind of quiet that means peace has finally learned your name. The porch boards cooled beneath our boots. Somewhere a night bird called once, satisfied with its echo. The night wind moved through the sage, gentle as breath, Somewhere far off, coyotes sang to the same stars we'd been staring at since the world began. I figured they were reminding us what it meant to belong to something older than pain. The sound rose and fell, a lullaby written before men learned guilt. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an intruder on the land. I felt included. Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. Your body will thank you. Winter came like an old debt collector, slow at first, then sudden and everywhere. At the start, it only whispered its intentions. A thin frost on the pump handle, a chill breath in the rafters, a thin white edge creeping across the trough by morning. Then one night, the wind changed, and everything that wasn't tied down went looking for shelter. The first real storm rolled out of the north like a memory, and the desert that had once burned my boots under summer sun now bit clean through them. Winter doesn't arrive in the west. It claims you, one cracked knuckle and chapped lip at a time. The wind at Dry Willow Draw turned sharp enough to scrape the skin from your knuckles, and the days grew short and gray. The kind of light that makes even the mountains look tired. Each morning, when I stepped outside to split wood, the sun hovered low and weak, a coin worn smooth by too many trades. The ridgeline crouched under its own shadow. The air stung, metallic and honest. When I exhaled, my breath drifted like smoke from some forgotten fire. By late November, our water barrel froze before dawn, and the hens stopped laying. I split wood until my shoulders burned, and Rosemary boiled the last of the beans with bacon grease and faith. There was a kind of pride in the scarcity. You learn what you can live without: milk, sugar, certainty. The axe handle rubbed a blister into my palm, and the blister hardened until it felt like another layer of truth. Inside, the smell of beans and grease wrapped the room in its own rough mercy. She stirred slow, humming under her breath, the same tune she'd used to quiet the hens back when they were still worth talking to. Nights were quiet, except for the stove's soft ticking and the sound of her turning a page, slow, like she was reading the same sentence twice to make it real. I'd sit near the door, knife in hand, scraping a new edge that didn't need sharpening, letting the rhythm fill the spaces between us. The flame made shadows dance on the walls, strange company but loyal. Every now and then she'd look up from her book, eyes reflecting the fire, and I'd catch the ghost of a smile, small, involuntary, warmer than the room deserved. We had learned to speak without words. A hand passed a mug. A look said more than prayer. There was comfort in that silence, the honest kind, earned by labor. Out here, talk wastes breath and warmth. The kind of peace we built came from repetition. Her pouring coffee, me checking the latch, the stove's steady heartbeat holding us both. Still, I could feel something waiting in her. The past never dies in one blow. It dies by inches, like ice melting off a roof. Sometimes she'd pause mid-stitch, needle caught in the fabric, gaze far beyond the window as if she saw someone walking away again. I never asked who. The desert doesn't pry. It simply holds what you drop. One night, snow started falling heavy, flakes fat as feathers, the air full of hush. I was outside stacking logs when she stepped to the doorway, shawl tight around her shoulders. The world had gone white to the horizon. Every sound was muffled, even my own breath. She stood framed in lamplight, the glow spilling onto the drift like honey poured over stone. "You'll freeze," she said. "I've done worse," I said. She smiled faintly. "You're a man who doesn't know when to quit." "I used to be a man who didn't know why to start," I said. My words hung between us, turning to vapor. That earned me a longer look. "And now?" "Now I do," I said, "because someone's got to keep the stove fed." Her laughter came light and low, caught in the snow. That's one way to call it. The sound warmed me more than the fire waiting inside. I walked her back inside, boots heavy with frost. The fire painted the room gold, soft against her face. She poured coffee for both of us and handed me a tin cup. Steam rose between us like something fragile learning to stand again. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked. She considered. "I think about staying," she said. "That's new." Her answer settled into me like heat from the stove, slow, deliberate, sure. Days passed in small work, patching the roof, mending shirts, hauling water through the crusted snow. The sky stayed hard and white, the kind of white that makes you squint even in shadow. We moved through it together like ghosts with chores. She'd shake snow from her skirts. I'd stamp it off my boots. The rhythm was the same every day, but it never felt wasted. At night, I'd sharpen my knife or fix the harness straps, and she'd read by lamplight from one of the few books she'd carried west. Her voice, when she read, filled the corners the wind couldn't reach. It was a Bible missing half the Psalms and a small volume of poetry that smelled faintly of lavender. Sometimes she read aloud. Her voice had a quiet strength that didn't ask to be believed. It simply was. The pages crackled when she turned them, old paper surrendering to her touch. That scent, lavender and smoke, became the smell of safety. One evening she read a line that caught in the air between us. "The world is not redeemed by force, but by endurance." She closed the book. "Do you think that's true?" "I think endurance is the only thing we ever owned," I said. "Everything else gets taken." Her eyes held mine for a long while. "You talk like a man who's had things taken." "I have," I said. "But I'm still here." She nodded once. "Then maybe that's enough." "Hen?" Outside, the wind agreed, brushing the walls with a sound like slow applause. By December, the snow had risen past the porch steps. The stove burned near constant. We'd sit shoulder to shoulder at night just to share heat. Sometimes our elbows touched, accidental and necessary. In that contact, the world felt almost fair again. I learned her rhythms. She hummed when thinking, frowned when she stitched crooked, and smiled only when she forgot she was supposed to be serious. I found myself working to earn that last one. One morning, I rode to Gallows Creek for flour and nails. The road was half ice, half regret. The town looked smaller than I remembered, like winter had stolen its pride. The wind funneled down the main street, whistling through boarded windows. Even the saloon sign hung silent, frozen mid-swing. Inside the post office, the clerk handed me a sealed envelope. "For Miss Rosemary Hale," he said, "came through Prescott." I hesitated before taking it. The handwriting on the front was familiar, neat, practiced, Thaddeus Hale. The name hit me like a cold draft. My fingers went numb around the paper. The world tilted a little. Ghosts always do that when they return without knocking. I rode home slow. The letter sat heavy in my coat pocket, burning like a coal I couldn't drop. When I reached the shack, Rosemary was kneeling by the stove, coaxing a flame. She looked up, smiled, then saw my face. "What is it?" I held out the letter. "From him." She went very still, took it without a word, turned it over once, twice, then set it on the table, unopened. "You're not going to read it?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. "If I open it, it becomes real, and I'm not ready for that." I nodded. "You take your time." We let the moment pass like weather. That night, she didn't read. She sat by the window, eyes on the snow falling steady outside. I didn't ask again. Some silences you protect, the way you guard a candle from the wind. 2 days later, she opened it. I was outside chopping wood when I heard the crackle of paper and the faint catch in her breath. I didn't move closer. I let her have the moment to herself. The axe paused mid-swing. Snow dusted my hat brim. The sound of the stovepipe creaking reached me through the wall like an echo of her heartbeat. When I came in, she was sitting at the table, the letter folded once more, her hands flat on it. "He's alive," she said quietly. "He says he's recovering. He's sorry." The way she said the word told me she'd stopped believing in its usefulness long ago. "Does he want you back?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "He says he wants to make things right." "Men say that when they mean they want to forget what they did wrong," I said. She looked up at me. "He asks me to come to Prescott, says there's a place for me there." "And what do you want?" Her eyes flicked to the window, where the snow piled high against the glass. "I don't know," she said. "Part of me owes him something. The other part doesn't owe anyone anything anymore." "You don't owe a man for his regrets," I said. She folded the letter again, precise as always. "Then what do I owe myself?" "That's between you and the land," I said. "But if you go, I won't stop you." She gave me a long, searching look. "You'd just let me walk away?" "I wouldn't let you," I said. "I'd watch you. There's a difference." She smiled, small and sad. "You have a talent for saying what hurts. Only when it's true. The truth always costs less before dawn." For 3 days, she didn't mention the letter again. The snow thawed a little. The creek muttered under the ice, and the wind came back from the east. She worked harder than usual, as if motion could keep the past from catching her. I watched her from the doorway, her figure small against the expanse of white, and thought, no one outruns what's already inside them. Then one morning, she came to me while I was mending the harness. Her coat was buttoned, her bag packed. "I'm going to Prescott," she said. I nodded. "You've decided. I have to see him," she said. "If I don't, I'll never be free." "You'll want Jonah," I said. "I'll take the mare," she said. "Jonah's yours." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "You won't come?" "I'd only make it harder," I said. She reached up, touched my face lightly. "You make everything harder, Elias Boone." "Then I'm consistent," I said. She smiled through the ache in her eyes, then turned and mounted. The snow squeaked under the mare's hooves as she rode away. I stood there until she vanished behind the ridge, the horizon swallowing her whole. Her absence settled over the land like fresh snow, quiet, complete, blinding. The next 3 days were long. I kept busy with chores that didn't need doing, repaired the fence twice, scrubbed the table, even fixed the hinge on the door that didn't squeak. The silence pressed heavy. The shack felt too big, the air too still. Even Jonah moved slower, sensing something missing from the rhythm. At night, I sat by the fire and stared at her empty chair. The world outside was nothing but wind and white. I caught myself listening for the sound of her turning a page that wasn't there. On the 4th morning, I heard hooves. I stepped to the porch, heart hammering like a fool. She was there, frozen cheeks, eyes tired, coat dusted with snow. She slid down from the mare and stood still for a long breath before speaking. "He's gone," she said. "Ta deuce?" She nodded. "Fever took him before I arrived. They buried him outside town. The letter had been written weeks before he died." "Oh?" "I'm sorry," I said. She looked at me, eyes shining with something that wasn't quite grief. "I'm not," she said. "Not anymore." I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only prayer that fits. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell snow in her hair. "He was a good man once," she said, "but he never saw me. Not really. You did." "I didn't mean to," I said. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it real." Outside, the last of the snow loosened from the roof and fell with a sigh. Winter broke at last. The thaw came with wind and mud and birdsong that sounded like laughter. We spent a week hauling water and mending the roof where the snow had bowed it in. Each day smelled more like forgiveness. The ground softened underfoot. The creek found its voice again. One evening, we sat outside, boots in the mud, mugs of coffee cooling beside us. The land smelled alive again, wet sage, new grass, the faint sweetness of relief. She said, "Do you ever think about spring?" "Every time the fire dies," I said. She leaned back, eyes on the sky. "I used to think love was about finding someone to rescue you. And now? Now I think it's about finding someone who'll hand you the hammer," she said. I smiled. "Then we've got work to do." She laughed, that low, warm sound that made the world feel worth keeping. Her laughter drifted out over the valley, mixing with the call of the meadowlarks. The horizon burned gold, and for the first time since I'd come west, I felt something like peace that didn't need permission to stay. It settled in my chest, the way dawn settles over a forgiven land. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept in like a stray dog that had been whipped too often and wasn't sure it was welcome. It nosed at the edges first, the south side of fence posts, where the sun lingered longer, the shallow pans where meltwater gathered and then vanished, the thin green around the base of cottonwoods that looked like someone had drawn a promise with a blunt pencil. The air changed before anything else did. Cold still lived in it, but it had started carrying other things too. The damp breath of thawed soil, the sharp sweetness of sap waking in the limbs, a faint mineral tang like rain practicing its signature. The snow melted slow, pooling in the furrows, darkening the fence posts. You could chart the afternoon by the retreat of white. It didn't rush. It shrugged its shoulders and stepped back a pace at a time. I watched the drip lines reach down and leave brown tear tracks on the boards. the knots of wood drinking like old men at a bar. Where the ground released the water, the earth exhaled a smell I'd missed without knowing it, loam and root, and the memory of last year's heat. Every morning I woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves and birds arguing in the cottonwood. They argued with a kind of casual ferocity that made me smile. Short bursts, quick replies, long pauses in which one of them definitely thought better of it and then didn't. The eave drip was steadier, a metronome keeping time for the day's work. Inside, the stove ticked softer now that it wasn't being asked to save our lives every hour. The world was remembering itself. I felt it in my bones first, the way you feel old music before you place the tune. Winter had been a narrowing of roads, of choices, of breath. Spring widened everything. The horizon seemed to step back, generous again, and colors began to say their names. Rosemary had taken to walking the ridge at dawn, the hem of her skirt brushing the wet grass. She moved like a field hand and a queen at once, practical step, lifted chin. From below I could see the small puffs of vapor from her breath and the occasional bright flicker when the rising sun caught the pins in her hair. The ridge's spine ran clean toward the west, and she followed it like a thought she trusted. From a distance, she looked like part of the land, same patience, same quiet defiance. I had the foolish feeling that if she stood there long enough, the ridge would shift under her to make a better view. She'd stopped wearing the heavier shawl by then. The lighter one lay around her shoulders like a private weather, lifting at its own pace. One morning, she came back with wildflowers tangled in her hand. "They grow near the creek," she said, setting them in a cup by the window. "First ones this year." The stems were thin, their petals absurdly brave against the gray of the room. They smelled like clean dishwater and sunlight. I watched the way her fingers released them, careful, but not precious, as if she'd already learned that gentleness doesn't work if it's afraid. "Then they're braver than most," I said. "They don't have a choice," she said. "Neither do we." The line landed as soft as a blanket and as heavy. I kept it with me all that day, tucked somewhere behind my ribs. We had stopped speaking about what came before the letter, the grave, the leaving. The past was buried deep enough to stay quiet if we didn't dig at it. We didn't make a rule, we made a habit. It turned out habits are stronger. Instead, we worked. The kind of work that builds something solid beneath your feet. Fixing the corral, clearing the path to the spring, planting beans in rows straight enough to make her proud. She set the string line, and I sank the hoe into that new, damp earth. The sound was good, a crisp break and a soft crumble. The seeds rattled into my palm, simple as a promise you actually mean. She knelt to cover them, patting the soil like she was calming a skittish animal. The path to the spring took a whole morning. We cut back willow and scrub, rolled stones aside, and by the time we were done, the creek's talk had turned from a mumble to a conversation you could follow. Some nights, I'd catch her looking out the window long after the lamp was out. "Counting stars," I'd ask. "Counting chances," she'd say. "Any left?" "Maybe one," she'd answer. "If I don't waste it." I never asked what spending it would look like. I figured the land would tell us when the time came. By May, the hills were green again. The hens had started laying, the cow was fat with calf, and the creek sang louder than before. Green like the first notes of a hymn, shy at the edges and full-throated in the folds. The hens had found their pride. They strutted with purpose, gossiping as they went to their boxes and came out complaining less. The cow moved slower and looked smug about it. We both stood and watched the creek, the way you watch a child sleep just to make sure the breathing is steady. It felt like the land itself was breathing again, and for the first time, I was breathing with it. The old tightness in my chest, that war gift, that desert tax eased a notch. I woke without the feeling that I was late to something I couldn't name. We rode into town one afternoon for supplies. The townsfolk nodded when they saw us, no whispers this time, no sideways glances. We were just another pair of settlers trying to hold our corner of the world together. Gallows Creek looked better in spring light, less like a sentence, more like a fact. The boardwalk still complained, but it didn't sound bitter about it. Men tipped hats. Women looked and looked away without inventorying what we carried. The livery boy broke into a grin when he saw Jonah, and Jonah, vain creature, arched his neck as if he'd meant to be admired. At the general store, the clerk smiled at Rosemary. "Mrs. Boone," he said politely. She blinked. "It's Hale," she said. Then softer, "For now." The clerk nodded, not a tremor of apology, and said about weighing flour, as if names were a detail for letters, not living. He nodded, unbothered, and went about weighing flour. She looked at me with a half-smile that said more than any promise could. It said we were moving in the same direction. It said no one needed to hurry. On the ride home, the wind kicked up dust, warm and easy. She said, "You ever think about what comes after this?" "You mean after spring?" "I mean after peace," she said. Her hands sat light on the reins. The mare walked as if she was stepping into a story she'd been told before. I thought about it. "Maybe peace is what comes after everything else," I said. She didn't answer, but she smiled, and I figured that was close enough. The dust lifted behind us, soft as breath. I let the silence stand because it held. One afternoon, while she was tending the hens, I started mending the roof again, habit more than need. I wandered the shingles like a man looking for an excuse to be above his own life. The cedar up there had weathered to a silver that satisfied me. You can't fake that color. The sky paints it for you, a day at a time. I found an old cedar plank in the shed, the same one I'd used to mark my father's grave years ago. It had a knot the size of a thumbnail, like a coin set in wood. My father's name had worn off long ago. Weather does that for you whether you ask it to or not. I sat with the plank across my knees and let the grain suggest what it wanted. I thought about carving a new name into it, not as a marker, but as a beginning. Places deserve their own names. A man's fades quick. A place's can linger, even if folks change what they call it later. When Rosemary came up behind me, I didn't hide it. "You building something?" she asked. "Trying," I said. She brushed a strand of hair from her face. "What for?" "For us," I said. "Something that says we were here." Her eyes softened. "You think anyone will care?" "Maybe not," I said, "but we will." She nodded once. "Then make it straight." I liked the way she negotiated with certainty, no flourish, all truth. I carved slow, careful strokes. The letters weren't fancy, just true, the draw. The knife's point made a soft, chuffing sound. Curl by curl, the cedar lifted in pale ribbons and fell to my boots. The shape of the words settled into the wood until it looked like they'd been waiting there. I sanded them with my thumb, the oil from my skin darkening the cut just enough. "That's it?" she asked, smiling. "That's everything," I said. "No man's name, just the land." She ran her finger along the groove of the T and said nothing, which meant she agreed. That night, we ate by the fire cornbread, beans, and the last of the whiskey Dev Merritt had sent up from Gallows Creek. The cornmeal tasted like sun held over from last year. The beans tasted like patience. The whiskey tasted like a promise we had no business making and made anyway. Heat pooled in my chest and spread slow, like a map being unrolled. She drank a little, enough to laugh easy, her voice warm and low. She leaned back, hair undone from a pin I'd watched her lose, and her boots crossed at the ankle. The lamplight put a coin of glow in each eye. "You ever wonder," she said, "if we just dreamt this whole place?" I looked around, the stove ticking, the window fogged, the smell of cedar and coffee. "If it's a dream," I said, "I'll stay asleep." She leaned forward. "Then maybe I'll stay with you." "Oh." We both looked at the empty chair by the new-made table, and the room seemed to widen to fit that idea. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't said. It had weight, temperature, a pulse. I let it move through me without trying to catch it. By midsummer, we'd built the second room smaller than planned, but solid. We set the sills on stones we'd pulled from the field, our hands black with creosote and satisfaction. The walls went up square, the roof tight from lessons winter had taught cheap and collected dear. Sweat ran, and the saw sang, and the hammer gave the day a backbone. The window faced east, catching the first light of day. She'd set a chair there for sewing, and I built a small table beside it. When the sun broke, it came right through that glass and set her needles in a jar to gleaming. The tabletop was pine, soft and ready for the marks a life makes. She put her thimble there like a crown. We never spoke about what the room might one day hold, a cradle, maybe, or just a promise of one, but we both worked harder after it stood. I caught her measuring the floor with her eyes, then looking away before the vision finished with her. I pretended not to notice. The way a man pretends he believes a horse won't shy at thunder if he praises it enough. Sometimes I'd catch her standing in the doorway, looking at the empty space, with a kind of reverence. "It smells new," she'd say. "It smells like tomorrow," I'd answer. She liked that. She said it back to me once, when I came in with sawdust in my hair. "You smell like tomorrow." I carried that foolish like a medal. A storm rolled through in August, the kind that tears the sky open and makes the ground tremble. We saw it coming long before it arrived. A bruise blooming to the southwest, heat leaving in a hurry, the birds going quiet mid-sentence. When it hit, it slapped the world flat, and then lifted it by the corners. The front door shook against the latch, like a man who'd changed his mind at the last second. Rain hammered the roof, wind howled through the cracks, and lightning turned the world white every few seconds. Between the whiteouts, the room was black as a closed eye. Water tried its best to find a way in. The roof told it no, mostly. The smell of ozone slid under the door like a knife laid on a table to make a point. We sat close by the stove, the fire fighting back against the noise. It popped and threw off sparks like a small, brave army. She had pulled her chair close enough that our knees almost touched. Almost was as far as both of us brought ourselves to take it. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said. "When I was little, I'd hide under the bed. Did it help?" "Sometimes," she said. "But then I realized the thunder doesn't care who hides." "Neither does the world," I said. She looked at me. "Then why keep fighting it?" "Because we can," I said. "Because it's ours, even if just for a while." "Oh?" She reached for my hand. "That's enough." Her fingers were cool from the air, warm at the palm. It wasn't a plea. It was an agreement signed without ink. The morning after the storm, the air was clear. The world rinsed clean. Everything wore a sharper outline, as if a careful hand had redrawn the edges in graphite. The mountains sat nearer. The sky, washed hard, showed its high, thin bones. The hills were greener than I'd ever seen them. We walked to the creek, our boots sinking in the wet grass. Each step made a pleasant sucking sound that would have annoyed me any other time. Today it felt like proof of abundance. The creek had leapt its usual course and then returned, leaving a lace of foam snagged on the stems along its bank. She stooped to pick up a wild lily and tucked it behind her ear. I said, "You'll ruin it doing that." She said, "Then I'll wear another tomorrow." We laughed, easy, like the sound belonged to us. I wanted to hold the sound in my mouth, to taste it later when the day got quieter. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of the last West Town. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. The line arrived in my head like a toast you'd say, from a porch rail to the road, to any traveler within earshot. I pictured the folks scattered along this territory, women with their hands braced in smalls of backs, men knocking mud from boots, children chasing chickens with noble futility. Bless them. Bless their hands. Bless their coffee gone cold, and their bacon gone hard. Bless their fence wire singing in the south wind. That evening, we sat outside, watching the sky burn down to red and gold. The kind of red that forgives a man, the kind of gold that makes him want to deserve it. Heat leaked from the earth and rose through the soles of our boots. A hawk drew slow circles, punching its shadow in and out of the sage. She leaned her head on my shoulder. A simple weight, a rightness. I felt my breath lengthen to fit it. "You still think about leaving?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said. "But it's different now." How? When I rode west, I was running from something. Now I'm running toward it." She smiled, eyes half closed. "What's it?" "You," I said. "This, whatever name we give it." The wind took her laugh and carried it along the ridge like a good rumor. The wind carried her laughter down the ridge, soft as prayer. Somewhere a calf bawled and a mother answered, and the evening made room for both. I kept a journal after that, scraps of thought, small drawings of the land, notes about weather and fences. I wasn't writing for anyone who'd read it. I was writing to prove to myself the days had shape. I sketched the turn of the creek under the cottonwood roots, the angle of the new room's window when the sun was just so, the way her hand looked on the handle of the kettle impossible to get right, which is why I kept trying. On the last page, I wrote, "We never belonged to the world, but for a while, the world belonged to us." When I set the pencil down, the words stood there without wobble. I liked that they didn't need my hand on them anymore. When I showed it to her, she read it twice, then closed the book. "That's enough story for one life," she said. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe it's the first chapter." She stood, looking out at the hills where the sun had dropped low. "You ever think about the future? Only when it looks like this," I said. She reached for my hand again, firm and steady. "Then let's keep walking." We did past the fence, past the edge of our land, into the high grass that shimmered like water in the evening light. Grass against our boots sounded like silk being folded. Crickets started up their looms. The sky thinned to that pale electric blue that proves night has a mind of its own. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, AMEN, below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life. A mail-order bride was left at the station until a broken man found redemption in her baby's cry. The dust swirled in a relentless, choking cloud around Eleanor Vance's ankles as she stepped down from the stagecoach. It wasn't the genteel, golden dust of her New Orleans memories, but a coarse, angry red grit that coated her traveling dress and stung her eyes. The driver flicked his reins, the horses stamped, and the coachman's weary call, "Redwood Springs," fell dead against a town that seemed to listen only to itself. The oppressive silence, broken by the mournful creak of a windmill and the impatient snorts of the team, felt more menacing than the clamor of any city street. A small 6-year-old hand, clammy with fear, clutched hers. "Mama, where are we?" Josephine whispered, her voice a fragile thing against the wide, unforgiving sky. "Where we start again," Eleanor said, trying to make the words steady enough to carry. She tasted the lie thin as paper, bitter as old coffee. The truth was uglier, a ledger full of a dead man's promises, a seal pressed into wax like a bootprint on a throat, a home dangled like a carrot and snatched away by the same hand that offered it. She had not come west to start again. She had been chased. The town itself was a testament to its master. Every painted board seemed scabbed with a crude claim. "Property of S. Thorne." The sign above the saloon door had been repainted so many times the letters had a raised scar to them. Even the air felt like it belonged to him, heavy, impatient, collecting debts. The bank's door swung open, and with it came the sharp smell of ink and stale cigar smoke. A man stepped out in a too fine suit, already losing its war with the dust. His face was a roadmap of hard bargains, his eyes winter cold. He saw her the way a rancher sees a scrawny calf at auction. Weight, worth, trouble. Silas Thorne. A lazy, predatory grin crawled over his mouth. "Well, well, look what the wind blew in." His voice had gravel in it, and so did his smile. "The lovely Mrs. Vance, I didn't think you had the backbone to show." Eleanor drew Josephine behind her skirts and lifted her chin. "Mr. Thorne," she began, and the tremor in her voice made her furious with herself. "I've come to appeal to your reason. My husband's debt wasn't mine, and the house." "Reason?" He laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Reason left these parts with the last spring rain. Your husband was a fool. He bet on a phantom vein and lost. Now the bill is yours. That's how ink works." He reached a hand toward Josephine's cheek, casual as you please, and caught a palm across his knuckles for the effort. "Don't touch her," Eleanor hissed. Silas looked down at the red mark, amused. "Feisty. I like feisty. It burns hot and quick." He leaned in until she could count the pockmarks along his jaw. "The land is mine. The house. I might be persuaded to let you keep a roof if the right papers are signed." His breath was whiskey and rot. "I can be generous to you and your little secret." The word he didn't say was louder than the one he did. Bastard. The sound of it rippled through the empty street, as if the boards themselves were listening. "I'd rather burn my home to the ground," Eleanor said, voice shaking but true, "than stake it on your charity." Silas's smile never reached his eyes. "Have it your way. You've got till sundown to get your saint's answer together. Try to run, and the desert will deliver you back to my door, dry as parchment." He touched his hat brim, not in courtesy but possession, and strolled off toward the saloon, 2 men peeling off the shade to follow him like flies.